Hi, thanks for joining me. So today I want to do a question vlog style video here about the Hyperdimension Neptunia games. I've gone ahead and compiled some information from Metacritic and made some charts that I think are pretty interesting to look at and help address some questions that I have that are actually still really open-ended. I'd really like your feedback on them. Speaking of feedback, I did want to say thank you very much for all the feedback that I got on my previous video, the beginning of my 7th Gen Collection Voodoo series. It seems to have been very well received, so I do want to keep going with that. Hopefully there'll probably be another video up pretty soon, maybe tomorrow. So diving right into the Neptunia games here, I pulled some information from Metacritic. I understand it is Metacritic, and its usefulness is limited, but in situations like this, I think it is extremely helpful and pertinent. So, taking a look at the PlayStation 3 games in the Neptunia series, this is the platform that the series was born on. And you can see that the first game was not very well received by critics. It was, I would say, panned here at a 45 aggregate score. However, with players, it was actually fairly well received. A 70 is a pretty respectable score. Now, the interesting thing is we see this pattern repeated in the the games as they come out. Neptunia Mark II, Neptunia Victory, made a lot of refinements to the systems, and I think added a lot to the series. And you can see that with both critics and players, the reviews became more and more favorable. But there's still a fairly significant discrepancy between the critical reception and the player reception for the whole series of games here on the PlayStation 3. Now, moving on to the PlayStation Vita, we see that it's much more consistent. Now, one thing to note about the games that were released on the Vita, they are redone versions of the first 3 games, informed, I would say, largely by the last game on the PlayStation 3, which was Hyperdimension Neptunia Victory. There may be something to that in terms of accounting for the better critical reception, but we can see here that even in some spots the critical reception is slightly higher than the player reception. So definitely a much more even across the board on the PlayStation Vita. Now, moving on to the PC, which was in some ways the next system that this series was ported to. We unfortunately don't have enough critics information for all of the games in the series in order to get an aggregate score, but we do have an aggregate score for the first game, and we can see here it also was much more consistent with the way that the players have viewed the game, and here a 72 and a 78 in terms of the player reception. Now, taking a look at the PC player reception here, we do see scores, I think some of the highest scores across any of the platforms, with a 78 here for Rebirth 1, pretty significant drop to Rebirth 2, but an 81 on the Neptunia Victory 2, which I find very interesting, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But let's take a look at the PlayStation 4 here, where we have the only game that came out on the PlayStation 4 so far, Megadimension Neptunia Victory 2, and again, pretty similar to the Vita and the PC here. We have a 71 aggregate score for critics and 75 for players. So, let's take a look here at basically the critical versus player reception averaged for each of the systems, and we can see that for the PlayStation 3, the critic reception is very low across all of the games that came out on the platform, especially in comparison to how it was received by players. And this is, again, much more consistent on the other platforms, the standouts being the PC, which has the highest aggregate player reception and critical reception, followed by the PlayStation 4, where Megadimension Neptunia Victory 2 seems like equally liked by the players. So the major questions that these data leave me is what accounts for the discrepancy on the PlayStation 3 in particular between the way that these games were received by players and the way that they were received by critics. In particular, in the case of Neptunia Victory, where even though the games released on Vita, for instance, were remastered to a certain extent, the template for those being Victory makes it a little bit odd that those were so much more well received by critics on other platforms than they were on the PlayStation 3. What is it that's unique about the PlayStation 3, or maybe specifically critics writing reviews for games on the PlayStation 3 that makes them so much less well reviewed on that platform? This is not a question that I have an answer to. It's something that I find honestly very odd. I'd love to hear any insights that you guys might have into this kind of almost unexplainable discrepancy. Next up, the other question, big question that's raised for me is, why was this series so well received on the PC? And maybe that shouldn't be surprising. It's a fun series, and and it was well received by players on all of the platforms. But in particular, it seems to be especially well received on the PC, not just amongst players, but also critics. And it's the kind of thing that I don't imagine PC gamers being really into. And some of this has to do with my perception of PC gamers and PC gaming. But, this series seems to me the antithesis of what I would expect PC gamers to respond well to. It's not a series that is carried by its graphics. It's not any kind of technical showpiece, for instance. And additionally, it's also very Japanese. It's very anime. The game isn't necessarily trying to innovate on gameplay or necessarily cater to any kind of like hardcore game playing audience. It's a pretty traditional turn-based JRPG style of game. Certainly a game genre that I think can still be relevant, but it's something that's kind of falling out of favor. Honestly, it relies on clever writing and video gaming in-jokes and just charming characters to carry the series, and that's not the kind of thing that I would expect to be well received on the PC platform. So if you guys have any insight into that as well, I would be really interested to hear your thoughts. It's certainly one of, I would say, the most surprising things about these data that I've collected, and I just wanted to share that with you guys. So thank you very much for watching. I hope that you'll join me again for more video game and anime related videos. Take care.